Multi-hazards, all about protecting communities.
Hello again, everybody. This is Multi-Hazards, the podcast where we take a deep dive into issues in emergency management, climate change adaptation, security, etc. And in a nutshell, our goal is protection, protecting communities. So welcome, Vin Nelson here. And today, it is a tremendous privilege to have a special guest, Dr. Burçak Başbuğ Erkan. So, Dr. Başbuğ Erkan is Senior Fellow of Higher Education Academy, SFHEA, at the School of Energy, Construction and Environment at Coventry University, United Kingdom. She is a lecturer and also the course director for the Master of Science in Disaster Management and Resilience at Coventry University, as well as an associate research at the Center for Trust, Peace and Social Relations, CTPSR, there at Coventry University. Her other current positions include Editorial Board member of the journal Disasters, a Global Challenge Research Fund GCRF Urban Disaster Hub project team member with responsibility for Istanbul city in Turkey. She's academic director of the Institute for Civil Protection and Emergency Management, ICPEM, etc. So her past experience in these fields reaches back to 2005. So she has a PhD in statistics from the London School of Economics and Political Sciences, United Kingdom, 2007. She has a Master of Science in Statistics from University of Warwick, United Kingdom, 2002, and a Bachelor of Science in Statistics from the Middle East Technical University, METU, in Ankara, Turkey, from 1999. Dr. Burçak Başbuğ Erkan has expertise on policy development in disaster risk reduction, disaster risk management, resilience, accountability, financial management, strategies for disaster losses, catastrophe insurance, disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management, education, risk management, and risk analysis. She has been the director of the Turkish Disaster Data Bank project for AFAD in Turkey, as well as the Turkish Catastrophe Insurance Pool. She has 20 years' experience in national and international work in teaching, consulting, and training in disaster risk reduction, disaster risk management. Dr. Burçak Başbuğ Erkan has extensive working experience in developing multi-hazard countries and also field experience such as the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, response to the Syrian refugee crisis, the 2011 Van earthquakes, and the May 2014 Soma mine fire in Turkey. She has published many journal publications and books, worked on numerous projects, and received many awards. So listeners, it's my custom here at the Multi-Hazard podcast before I start every interview, because of deep respect for the First Nations people on whose land I podcast, here in the suburbs of Vancouver, BC, Canada, to say a territorial acknowledgement. I'm taking it from Kwantlen Polytechnic University, or KPU, and here we go. We work, study, and live in a region south of the Fraser River, which overlaps with the unceded, traditional, and ancestral lands of the Kwantlen, Musqueam, Katsi, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kikite, and Quiquetlam peoples. These are the names of various First Nations groups around me here in Greater Vancouver, here on the west coast of Canada. Now, without further ado, let's get to the interview. So, welcome to our show, Dr. Başbuğ Erkan. And I hope I'm saying your name right.
Yes, exactly.
Great. Dr. Burçak Başbuğ Erkan, and I even learned a special word here. It's hoş geldiniz. That means welcome in Turkish. So, and you're coming all the way from UK right now, and I'm just wondering, how are you doing these crazy last few months of COVID-19 pandemic, and how is it trying to work and get everything done as usual?
Okay, thank you for your kind invitation. Thank you for your good Turkish pronunciation and efforts to pronounce my name the correct way, which is really hard for Turkish people, actually. Anyway, we're doing good in the UK. So the lockdown is in application since 23rd of March. Believe me, I haven't been outside my site for like 10 weeks or so, but it is going back to normal very slowly, gradually, eventually.
Okay. Yeah, it's not easy for people to like stay indoors. In Canada, we have a word for that. It's called cabin
Community.
fever.
So yeah,
Cabin fever.
everyone is like, pardon?
Cabin fever, it means like, for example, if you live in a place where too much snow and like 6 months or 5 or 6 months
Okay.
of snow, and you're in your cabin, you're in your house, you can't go out.
Okay.
People go crazy. It's like they start bouncing off the walls, and it's called cabin fever.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's happening with everybody. So now I know you're at a place, I hope I'm saying it right. It's called Coventry University. And in UK, that's like outside of London somewhere?
Okay. Coventry is very close to the second largest city in the UK, which is Birmingham. So
Okay.
we're in between Birmingham, closer to Birmingham than London, but it is actually Coventry sits in a very very strong location. So it is like kind of the hub of the network from south to north, east to west. So it is Coventry University, and I'm very glad to be here.
Okay, that's awesome. Now, I saw online it says that you are the course director for the Master of Science in Disaster Management and Resilience on campus there. So what's that all about?
Okay, Coventry University has a reputation hosting the oldest, longest surviving disaster management program in the UK, actually. And the program that I'm course directing is called the Master in Disaster Management and Resilience. So why it's resilience on Master in DMR on campus and off campus, because we have online degrees as well. And on top of disaster management and resilience, I can tell you we have a Master in Emergency Management and Resilience. And we have a master program in crowded places and public safety management, which is, I think, where I find very crucially important, thinking about the festivals, music events, etc. So, as I said, Coventry University is the longest surviving, oldest program in disaster management, and we offer BSc degree as well, undergraduate, both undergraduate and masters.
Okay, that's wonderful. Now, what kind of jobs do the graduates look for and get when they finish?
Oh, that's a very good question. And this is a very crucial question. If I would be an undergraduate, I would think about it. They can get jobs at national agencies like environmental agency. They can easily get jobs at NGOs, INGOs. They can work at multilateral agencies. So the job opportunities has a very wide spectrum. So they can work from insurance sector, from finance sector to humanitarian, from business continuity to risk management, cybersecurity to emergency management. So the spectrum of the job opportunities is very wide at national and international level.
Wow, that's awesome. Now, I've seen from your online bio that you've been in this field for a long time and you have a lot of rich experience. So just wondering, how did you get into this field in the first place?
Okay, thank you. I'm a statistician by my first degree. So my undergraduate was held in Turkey in statistics. Then I moved to UK for my master's and PhD, and both in statistics. But because I come from a multi-hazard country as my home country, I worked on the earthquake damage data. And in my PhD, I was concentrating, because it was statistics, on earthquake insurance claims data. There's a compulsory earthquake insurance system in Turkey that I used and modeled the data the first time back in 2000 to 2003-04 period. And the final chapter of my PhD thesis was about disaster risk management, because I very much like the idea of helping people, humanity in need. So the final chapter of my PhD took me to this broad area, and I'm very happy to be here.
Okay. Now, yeah, it looks like statistics. It seems like I took like one course in that in university, and I was shaking in my boots because the final exam was worth 80%. And I remember I was just this, 20-year-old, and I was like crying in the laundry room because I'm like, if I fail this statistics course, I have to go back to university again for another year. I fail everything. So it was like really, but I passed it. I got like A plus, and I was like, whew. But I know statistics is so hard, and like how can your background in statistics play a role in disaster management?
Okay, again, another good question. Thank you. I think because when you say statistics, many people will think about numbers and data flowing around. And the key point is we, as statisticians, we need to make this data talk to you, make it meaningful. So create some reports and like the COVID-19 numbers that everyone follows every day. Just using statistics and data and numbers and making them meaningful, making the data talk to you will help you to produce future policies, which we need for sustainable development and disaster management. So that's how I link statistics, like mainly quantitative data from my background. Quantitative data, make it talk and meaningful and support future policies in disaster management and resilience as evidence. So I think it's a very good combination, and I'm happy to be in both.
Right. It seems like a lot of people are using this for not only research, but there's kind of like a second life for this in artificial intelligence. Here in Vancouver, we have a geohazards company, and they're basically using statistics and all kinds of data, feeding it into artificial intelligence. So it's also very interesting. Now, am I saying Dr. Başbuğ Erkan, right? I got
Yeah, you
that
can
right?
call me Burçak. You just say Burçak, that will be better. If you
Dr.
don't mind.
Erkan? Sorry?
Başbuğ. You can call me with my first name, please, if you
Okay,
don't mind.
great. Okay.
Burçak is better.
I like to be correct about these things. Okay, so Burçak, you've seen a lot over your career, and I could see in your bio that you've been involved, I think, in some earthquake situations, some other things. I'm wondering if there's a couple situations that over your career that really stand out for you.
Okay, thank you. I like to be in the field, and because of from my disaster management hat and the first earthquake experience that I have been into aftershock, which was like a different scenario because you can be an expert, but at the time of the earthquake, you are a human being, and your brain just stops thinking at some point. There are like 4 occasions I can count and name here. One was the reconnaissance work that we have been after following an earthquake in the eastern part of Turkey. And then I've been to the Kashmir region to follow up the reconstruction after the 2005 Pakistan earthquake, which was a huge experience for me to learn and understand a different system. I have been into an underground coal mine, bituminous coal mine in north of Turkey. So I went down like 450 meters and walked underneath Black Sea for 1.5 kilometers. That was another striking time, and we produced and published papers out of these experiences. And I was in the Syrian refugee camps in southeast of Turkey, following as a UNICEF evaluator for education response. So that type of real field experience, practice, made me merge with my theoretical background and publish. So I find these 4 situations very important milestones in my life, I can say.
Right. It's kind of like a different thing than when you're studying, reading about it in a book or online or in a class than really
Totally.
being in a disaster. Like it's 2 different things, right? So,
Yeah.
wow.
Really
So,
different.
now I know you're based primarily in the United Kingdom right now, and your homeland is Turkey. So I'm wondering if you could tell us overall what's happening right now in Turkey in terms of disaster management.
Okay, there's a lot to tell. I can start like this year, 2020, there was an earthquake in eastern part of Turkey in January. Then there was an avalanche again in eastern part of Turkey in February. Then COVID-19 pandemic started. Then there was a there was a thunderstorm in south of Turkey, destroying the greenhouses. So, like, if a disaster comes, it follows the one of the other. And in Turkey, it's a multi-hazard country, so we are very vulnerable to earthquakes, avalanches, rock falls, human influx, so any type of health disaster nowadays. We live, we learn, and the good thing is with the Turkish disaster management system is we are trying to train the community to increase community resilience, make the local authorities more capable of and capable of preparation, response, recovery. And the system in Turkey is like, it used to be top down before 2009. Now it's like bottom up, so it is easier to function at the local level. And there are hazards every day to manage. So you can ask other questions if you like, but if specific on COVID-19, Turkey has a very strong health system. If you're following the news, like the capacity of the ICU beds or the training of the health personnel or use of the PPEs, etc., it has a very strong build-up, clinical-wise, especially both research, but mainly on clinical response-wise, very good, well-structured health system. Because we have disaster prepared. We have hospitals for disaster preparedness, especially in Istanbul. So those hospitals already, which were designed against earthquake, like using the technology using in the world, like in country Japan. So that hospitals helped very much during the COVID-19 crisis.
Right. Now, my understanding, I'm just guessing here, but I probably think here that Turkey would have a lot of old buildings, because it's not like Vancouver, Canada, where the Europeans only came and built up this big city of Vancouver, like say from starting about 1870, 1880. But in Turkey, there are buildings that are like centuries old. So I'm just wondering, is like what's happening there in terms of, say, like the building codes and things like that for to kind of mitigate against earthquakes?
Okay, that's another good question. Thank you. The geopolitical location of the country, Anatolia, the mainland, has hosted like many civilizations for thousands of years. So, but geographically, again, it is a vulnerability because it is a very active seismic region. The thing is, people learn from their experiences, and Turkey has a very strong building code, which is regularly updated after following an earthquake. Like the strongest one. There have been series of earthquakes in Turkey starting from many hundred years ago, but like with the recent records from the Turkish Republic, 1939, 1960s, there was a big one in 1977, then 1992, and 1995, 96, 98. So the 90s was the decade of the earthquakes, and boom, the 1999 big earthquake occurred in the Marmara region on August 17th. And the same year, exactly in November 99, there was another earthquake, again in the Marmara region, western part of Turkey. So what happens is like the building code is revised. And I can proudly say Turkey has a very strong building code in the Mediterranean region. I work with structural earthquake engineers most of the time. And that's what I know from from their experiences, what I learned from my colleagues. And the building code retrofitting, especially in Istanbul, there's a very huge sustainable work has been ongoing past 15 years to retrofit, reconstruct, demolish and build again, or just retrofit schools, state schools, cultural places, hospitals. So that is an ongoing process. That's part of life in Turkey to prepare for, respond to, or recover from earthquakes.
Right. Now, I saw from some disaster studies that some countries, and I don't even know, maybe even here in Canada, but what happens is that you see elementary schools, like schools for little children, often they collapse in earthquakes before everything else, because maybe some local officials, they took a bribe or whatever, there was some politics behind the scenes, and so the allocated money does not go into the actual construction of the elementary school. So they use cheap wood or cheap bricks, and they just kind of throw it up, and then all of a sudden, oops, the school has collapsed and all these little children are gone. I don't know. Have you seen that happens like in Turkey or UK or any countries you've been involved in?
Okay, in the UK, it can't happen because this is not a seismic country. There's not like high seismic risk like in the other countries, but like Mexico, 1985 Mexico City earthquake, September the 1st, that was one of the examples where there has been a very heavy damage in the school buildings itself. So many of the casualties were school children because it was daytime at school. Pakistan, 2005 earthquake. That's why I said it's one of the important events in my life to visit the area. Not just after, because as a foreigner we cause chaos there, but after everything goes back to normal, that was the follow-up process. And that school safety is very important. There was one earthquake back in 2005 in Turkey. One of the boarding schools was collapsed. So there were some casualties of teachers as well as school children because it was a boarding school in eastern part of Turkey. And exactly a few days back, there was another earthquake. So if an earthquake happens in one location, it will happen again and again and again. We cannot estimate the time of it, but we can know that it will happen again and again because the fault line is sitting there. So Mexico, Pakistan, there were heavy damages from those 1985 earthquake and 2005 earthquake, but in Turkey it's not mainly, maybe it's just by chance, like it wasn't when the earthquake struck, it wasn't the school time, but it can happen, you never know. That's why there's a very big project ongoing to retrofit school buildings in Istanbul.
Right, that's awesome. You know, in Vancouver, Canada, since I was a kid, and I'm like half a century old, and they've been talking about the big one. The big one is coming. And so there's been talk about that. We even had this shakeout day where everybody had to, in the schools, we all had to get under the desks. And then last year they had a huge multi-agency earthquake exercise or drill or simulation. And so, you know, we get wildfires, we get like the smoke from wildfires, we get floods, but earthquake it hasn't happened in Vancouver yet, cross our fingers. But you've seen it up close and personal, so it's kind of scary to deal with, right? So I think people in Vancouver, we're kind of nervous about this.
Okay, they shouldn't be. The only way to be prepared is to have practice, to training. So that's good job if you had the drill last year, a big one. So you need to keep the memory of the people fresh by organizing some drills and practice. The only way to be prepared is the preparedness, number one, construction wise, because it's not the earthquake which kills people, it is the building quality which causes casualties, human lives. So if the construction is good quality, if you believe like you live in a safe house, even it can be a high-story building or just a small private villa. So if the building construction is good, then you need to just prepare for yourself for non-structural mitigation methods. But if you live in a very highly prone area and if you have any suspicions on the quality of the design of the building or construction, then it's better to have a check. And I'm always in favor. I believe like theory, you can read lots of books, you can read lots of rules, etc., drop, cover, hold, whatever. But if it's the time of when you practice it, that is the crucial point. So drills and training is important. And if there was an earthquake in the history, believe me, it will happen again. But you don't need to nobody needs to live in paranoia that it's going to happen anytime. So just live your life, but be prepared as much as possible.
Right. Now, I'm wondering about climate change. I don't know exactly if there's a connection between climate change and earthquakes, for example, but I do know that climate change is affecting a lot of extreme weather events in terms of like the frequency and also the magnitude of different weather events. And I'm just wondering that how has climate change played a role in what you've been researching and lecturing on in disaster management?
Okay, another good question. Thank you for raising this. I believe in the effect of the climate change, definitely, because you don't need to be a scientist who are doing climate change work research. Just like with naked citizen eye, you can see the weather change. I'm from Ankara, the capital of Turkey. So when I was a kid, there were like meters of heavy snow, okay, in winter in Ankara. So past 5 years, 6 years, there's no snow in Ankara, very, very, very little thin, and like for a few days. So that shows me something. If I had been collecting the data for the snowfall in Ankara for years, I would see and I would prove it with the evidence. Okay, that's where I can use the statistics hat. It's obvious. So there haven't been that many thunderstorms. There haven't been that many flooding. That there haven't been that many cyclones across the world. So we hear news every day from different part of the world. So I think there's a strong impact of climate change, and this is some risk to be managed. So that's how it goes in hand in hand by disaster management and resilience. Think of the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, there's a strong impact of climate change in the number of the hurricanes they experience and the severity of the hurricanes they experience in the region. They also experience earthquakes in the region, remembering the Haiti earthquake. So those countries need to be prepared both for earthquakes, and also they need to respond to the impact of the climate change. So in the climate change, they can do some research on the number, as you said, number and frequency and the severity of the hurricanes affecting the region. So I think they go in very much in hand. And if you look at the any multilateral agency report or UN reports or conferences or documentation, you cannot really separate like sharply that is for disaster management, that is for climate change, like the Paris Agreement or the Habitat Agenda or Addis Ababa Agreement or Sendai Framework, which are the main documentation on those topics. So they all have very similar lines which we could integrate if you read them as a whole piece.
Mm-hmm. So do you actually introduce climate change into the courses there at your university?
Yeah, we touched to, there's one module that I'm teaching. We touched, that's one day of this module is touching to climate change and its impacts. Okay. And how it goes along with DRR, DRM, disaster risk management, disaster risk reduction.
All right, that's great, because I was a little bit concerned in Canada. I studied the last couple of years, many emergency management courses, and I remember I took like so many courses, dozens and dozens and dozens of courses, and it was only mentioned, I think, once in one course on how to use the library. And I was a little bit concerned. I thought that, hey, in this field, of all the fields, like maybe in accounting, you don't have to think of climate change so much, but in emergency management, this is something that everybody involved in emergency management, they should keep up with it. It shouldn't be like some mystery to them. So
okay, so here I can say something if you allow me. Not every emergency situation is a disaster, but every disaster definitely is an emergency scenario. So that's the mindset.
Right. Now, I read an article, I think you published it last year. It was called From Emergency Response to Recovery, Multiple Impacts and Lessons Learned from the 2011 Van Earthquakes. And this podcast, one of my themes is how disasters can occur simultaneously or consecutively, and that makes everything problematic, especially disaster response, because you're not dealing just with one thing. It's like dominoes. The dominoes keep hitting each other, and you don't know which direction the dominoes will fall. Now, I know that disaster management, it's interdisciplinary, and you need interdisciplinary teams to confront disasters. And you need people to pool their knowledge to work on solutions. Now, I'm wondering if you can explain some of the impacts and lessons that came from this 2011 Van earthquake. Okay,
thank you. We published this paper in the journal Earthquake Spectra, which is one of the very high-level, top prestigious journals in earthquake field. So the earthquake, there was one earthquake occurred on October 23rd, 2011 in the city of Van. It's like you can pronounce it like number one earthquake. Okay. Van is very close. It's again very geopolitical location. It's very close to the Iran border. It's very close to the Iraqi border. So there are daily commercial activities between Iran, Iraq, and Van city. And Van's a very cosmopolitan city. And it has been the capital of the former older civilizations. It was called Tushpa. Alexander the Great was in the city when he was traveling to west. So that location is very important strategically. So and Van is sitting on an active fault line. The largest lake of the country is in Van. It's called Van Lake, and actively earthquake, seismically very active region. And there's a very dense human influx because of geographical location. So there's an airport which is like the hub to exit to other parts of the country and to the world. So there are lots of smuggling issues. Socioculturally, it is very cosmopolitan. That city is like a very open laboratory. If you want to go and study, do some work for disaster management, that's an open lab, I can say. So what happened is there was an earthquake on October 23rd, as I said. That was the first earthquake. And we were traveling to Marmara region to Yalova with a Japanese team to give training to teachers, school teachers, on disaster management. When this earthquake happened, we were on the road. So 2 weeks later, 9th of November, the second earthquake happened in the same location. So that was interesting. So consecutive earthquakes. But we were in Ankara at that time, and I was at METÜ, Middle East Technical University, and I was the director of the Disaster Management Center at METÜ back then. And I had a team. So my board members was a professor of psychology, professor of sociology, professor of earthquake engineering, professor of urban planning, professor of business administration. So I had friends who were working from architecture department, urban planning department.
Wow, that is unbelievable, because you had so many people pulled from so many different fields, and so it had a few waves to it.
Yeah. So the first one was on 23rd October. 2 weeks later, second one struck. So it was very interesting. People were panicking. So we went there when things calmed down. As you said, it is an interdisciplinary subject. So you need everyone. Disaster management is everyone's job. It's not just one science, one person. It is integrated. So everybody should have a say in disaster risk management if you want to really build up some resilience and build some capacity and reduce vulnerabilities. So we went to the field. So we stayed there for 3 days as a multidisciplinary team. We had some interviews with the national agencies, local government, NGOs who were helping the people, with Turkish Red Crescent, who set up the emergency sheltering tent camps very quickly. But the location is geographically very cold. It was winter, so there were harsh winter conditions. So weather, that is climate change. Weather impact is a very crucial component of emergency management on the first few weeks, you can say, or in the longer term shelters, providing shelters, wash. So like this human needs in the first few days to weeks is very important. Security was an issue. So many people sent the female part of the community to western part of the country to stay with their relatives. Or we visited some villages where farms were very much affected in the rural from the earthquake, because people's barns were collapsed, animals, cattle was dead. So there was no mechanism to protect them. So that until that time, I've never seen or taught of that part of disaster risk management, but you live, you learn. So for some time, community people from Van have been transferred to other parts of the country. So the winter would be over and they would come back when reconstruction was completed towards the spring 2012. So there were lots of lessons learned from that earthquake, and we produced a paper on this. Yeah.
Wow. Now, one of my impressions from all that you're saying, number one, to be in this field, you need to be kind of curious and you want to learn more about things. But another thing is you got to have what we call strong stomach. You have to have like nerves of steel, because if you're a kind of an easily scared person, this doesn't sound like the field for you. This is kind of like, do you want to be a police officer, a firefighter, or a paramedic driving an ambulance, right? This is something it's not for the faint of heart. So I'm just wondering, do you have any advice for people who are looking to work in this field?
Okay, thank you. Another super question. So we interview with the applicants to our program, and we ask them questions, and the most common answer I received personally is they want to do disaster management because they really love to help people in need, human beings. That's what comes as an answer, and I like that answer. That's a great answer. That's why I'm here. So I would love to hear people saying it, because you dedicate yourself. You don't make millions of dollars out of this. You don't make lots of money out of this business, but you help people. You help someone. So that is the job satisfaction you get from disaster management. So if they love this, if they have tendency and bias to help human beings make life better for them, protect the vulnerable, save the children, help women in need, help elderly, find some solutions for disabled people if there's a disaster or cyclone or tsunami, what happens. So if you want to really dedicate your time and just come up with some solutions for people who would need it, then feel free to contact with me or go into the disaster management field wherever in the world. And you need to be an global citizen, I think. You cannot just manage disasters or do this work sitting in one location, one country, because we live in a globalization is something there. And the SFHEA framework, which we use as the main framework for disaster risk reduction activities up to 2030, in line with Sustainable Development Goals. It says enhancement of internationalization. So you need to be a global citizen, I think.
Right, exactly. Well, myself, I studied climate change just on my own. I wanted to figure out, what is this? Why are some people denying it? Some people saying it's true. So I did a big study, took me a few months, and then I forgot about it. I concluded this is real, and then I said, well, what can I do? I'm just a poor guy living in a neighborhood outside of Vancouver. What can I do? And then later on, I found out that there's a school near me, Justice Institute of British Columbia. They were teaching disaster management. I never heard of this field. I didn't all I heard is like firefighters fighting wildfires, or there's police, paramedic. I never knew this field existed. So I got excited. I decided I'm going to join it. But as you were saying, it's people who want to protect other people, right? It's like, for example, you think about now there's this debate especially in the United States, about police, right? Is their job to they're called law enforcement officers, but their job is not to tase people with tasers. Their job is not to shoot people. Their job is to protect the community. And that's the theme of this podcast. And I hope that anybody who thinks about disaster management, the primary goal is to protect the community. So I'm just wondering, Burçak, do you have any last message that you'd like to give to our Multi-Hazards podcast listeners?
Yeah, I would love to. I think one person can make a lot of difference. Even one person can change the whole world with their efforts. And disasters for everyone. You can just live this in country X, but you travel to country Y the next day, and you can caught up in disasters. So be preparedness, and check the hazard profile of the country you're traveling to. That's important.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much, Burçak, for participating in this Multi-Hazards podcast. And we learned a lot in a short time. And I'm just looking forward to hearing more of your impact in the field and more of the studies you release. And that's just awesome. I'm also looking forward for myself to be involved in this field. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for your invitation, and thank you for the nice chat. Cheers.
Okay. Have a wonderful week.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. There it is, a wonderful interview with Dr. Burçak Başbuğ Erkan. Thank you again, Dr. Başbuğ Erkan, for being a very special guest here at the Multi-Hazards podcast. So a little disclaimer here that I add to each episode. This podcast is meant to be educational and does not try to offer legal, medical, or other specific advice unless otherwise noted. Also, the opinions expressed here do not necessarily reflect those of the organizations that the host, that's me, or guests are part of. So, here as I wrap up this episode, thanks to all of you precious listeners for hearing today's episode. I really appreciate it. Stay safe out there and stay tuned for more. This is Vin Nelson wishing you the best on your journey of surviving and thriving with all that life throws at you. Cheers to you all. Peace out.